It is past 3:30. So. Okay, Matthew says we're ready to roll, so I'll start off with the invocation. Lord, please continue to watch over us during these very difficult times. Please keep our families healthy and acquaintances together. Don't allow us to drift apart. And take care of our citizens of this fine city. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, hello everybody. We will let this, somebody want to make a motion on the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nobody signed up for comments from the audience. Mike, you were a late arrival. Do you have anything you need to say? Okay. Then with that, we'll move forward to the general manager's report.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. The first two items that we have are really kind of presentations. And the first one we're going to address is the audit report. Williams Keepers has been performing the audit for the last few months and really by teams. This is kind of the first time we've done this, but they're coming in remotely. So we've actually got Amanda Schultz and Kristen Brown with Williams Keepers, to present the audit report. James is actually coming in remotely as well, so he's online with us. And then Paul Trinhale, Director of Finance, is online as well. So I think those are the people that's going to be coming in. So we'll actually have Williams Keepers reports that'll come through Teams, and then Paul's financial report's going to come through the Teams app as well. And the first thing I wanted to do was thank Amanda and Kristen for the outstanding job that they've done on the audit report. They've been outstanding to work with, and staff has really enjoyed interacting with them and the rest of their staff on this audit. The one thing that's kind of unique, you've got a draft of the audit report before you. Timing and COVID and everything that's going on, City Council is actually meeting the 1st and 15th, which will be before our next meeting. So we're bringing this to you as quickly as we can so you guys get a chance to hear this and review it before it gets in front of council, just for our financial information as well. And then with the bond covenants, this has to be reported by the 1st of January. So we're under a pretty tight timeline to get it out to the bondholders and the creditors out there. So with that being the background, that's the reason you're seeing the audit report today. That's the reason you're seeing it in the draft format. And I'm actually going to defer to Paul and let him kind of present and introduce Kristen and Amanda, and then we'll kind of get into the audit report itself. So, Paul, can you hear me all right? I'm getting ready to mute and turn it over to you for a little bit. So.
All right, yep, you're coming through loud and clear. I hope everyone can hear me on this end. And I don't see any reason otherwise, but yeah, thanks again. So yeah, like Ken said, it's a bit of a unique environment, as everyone knows, but we do appreciate all the work that Williams Keepers has done, and just the opportunity to work with them this year. Most of you know that this is their first year taking over the engagement from Wade Stables, and it's been a pleasure. We've definitely had a lot to work through. It's never an easy task taking over a brand new entity for the first time, and so there's always a little bit of extra time that needs to be spent getting up to speed with everything and how everything operates, and so we do appreciate them putting in that time for us. So like Ken said, we do have Amanda Schultz with us. She's been the partner on the engagement, and it's just been awesome to work with, and Kristen Brown as well as a supervisor on the engagement and served as the audit in charge. There were a few staff that worked on the engagement as well. And I know both have tons of experience with local municipalities and utilities as well that go along with that. So we were really glad to have them come aboard and do the audit for us. And so really without further ado, I'll turn it over to Amanda to go ahead and go through the draft report that you have in front of you.
All right. Well, thank you, Ken and Paul, for those wonderful introductions. I will go ahead and share my screen so that you all can see the draft of the audited financial statements that we'll be presenting today. So bear with me for just one moment. financial statements?
Yes.
I can't see you guys anymore, so someone might tell me yes or no.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you, Amanda.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Just to kind of echo Paul's comments, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to audit. It was great to work with everyone this year, and we definitely appreciate the opportunity to present this draft of the audit statement to you all today. So the first two pages, financial statement, are the independent auditor's report, the opinion letter. And this is the only part of the financial statements that is our responsibility as your auditors. Management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements. Although we did not prepare them, it is a common practice for us as independent auditors to do so. Management has reviewed them and will ultimately approve them before they are issued. Our responsibility is to plan and inform the audit to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material statements. We used our judgment in determining how to audit the Board of Public Works. We performed a risk assessment process by reviewing balances, transactions, processes, and controls, and we focused our attention on the areas where the financial statements could potentially be misstated. So that means we did not audit every balance or every transaction, but we did do enough work in order to give an opinion on the financial Total liabilities decreased by $2.7 million, or 7%, primarily due to debt service payments that were made during the year. Another deferred item, deferred inflows of resources, decreased by $776,000, or 49%, again due to the GASB 68 pension plan and the GASB 75 OPEB plan balances reported by the plan's actuaries. So similar to deferred outflows of resources, deferred inflows of resources are also timing differences at year-end, and they will be recognized as inflows or revenues in future years. So the resulting total net position increased by $2.7 million, or 4%, of the Board of Public Works' total net position of $71 million. $47 million represents its net investment in capital assets. That is capital assets net of the related debt that was issued to acquire or construct those assets. $1.7 million is restricted for debt service, and the remaining $22.3 million is unrestricted and may be used to meet ongoing obligations to its customers. The next statement is the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position, or the income statement, and it's on page 7. This statement presents each fund's operating and non-operating revenues and expenses for the year ended June 30th, 2020. Total operating income increased by $304,000, or 12%, primarily due to a combination of increased water rates and decreased operating expenses. Total non-operating income or loss decreased by $259,000, primarily due to an increase in interest expense on the debt service payments that were made during the year. The resulting net change in that position was an increase of $2.7 million. The statement of cash flows is on page 8. This statement presents each fund's financial statements information in a different format by essentially reporting where the cash came in and where the cash went out during the year. The total net change in cash and cash equivalents was a decrease of $5.3 million during the year. All of the decrease was due to water funds purchases of plant equipment and debt service payments made during the year, as the other funds' cash balances actually increased during the year. So before moving on to the notes to the financial statements, I did want to bring to your all's attention regarding the recycling funds column of the actual financial statements. As a result of management's review of the draft, they questioned why the recycling funds revenues are being reported as operating revenues, these charges for services that I am attempting to point to here, since they will ultimately be passed on to the city of Hannibal. So we have determined just this morning, in fact, that since that is the purpose of those funds, is to be collected on behalf of and subsequently remitted to the city of Hannibal, that they should be treated as a liability on the balance sheet instead of as revenue on the income statement. So we will update the recycling funds column of the actual financial statements accordingly before we actually issue the audited financial statements. That presentation would be consistent with prior years, just to clarify that as well. So next are the notes to the financial statements. Note 1, which covers pages 9 through 12, is a summary of significant accounting policies. No new accounting policies were required to be implemented this year, which means that nothing was accounted for or reported differently in this year's financial statements compared to prior years. Note 2, which starts on page 12 and finishes on page 13, discloses additional information regarding cash and cash equivalents and investments that are reported on the balance sheet. Note 3 on page 14 discloses additional information regarding capital assets. And note 4 on pages 15 through 17 discloses additional information regarding long-term debt. So other than changes in amounts as a result of current year balances and transactions, the current year disclosures are consistent with prior years and again do support the amounts reflected on the face of the financial statements. Note 5 on pages 17 through 18 discloses discloses information regarding commitments and contingencies for items, specifically liabilities, that are not accounted for on the financial statements. Consistent with prior years, the current year disclosures are related to the Board of Public Works participation and its contract with the purchase and sale of energy in various states. Note 6 on pages 18 through 21 and note 7 on pages 22 through 24 disclose additional information regarding Board of Public Works participation in pension and OPEB plans, respectively. These are obviously very lengthy disclosures. They are each a few pages long. But they are required by GASB 68 for the pension plan and GASB 75 for the OPEB plan. And the information included in them comes directly from the actuaries who perform annual valuations on the plans. So finally, the audited financial statements include with the required supplementary information, supplementary information, and the other information that I mentioned at the start of our presentation. So are there any questions about audited financial statements specifically, or about the audit in general?
No. I do not believe so at this time.
Okay. I did want to touch on one more report that we will issue as a result of our audit. We will issue a management letter regarding our findings and recommendations related to internal control. The purpose of a financial statement audit is to get an opinion on the financial statement, so we perform limited procedures on internal control, so we won't be giving an opinion on internal control. But the management letter will indicate that we did not identify any material weaknesses in internal control based on those limited procedures that we performed, but it will include a few best practice type recommendations. Again, not material weaknesses, also not significant deficiencies in internal control, but they will be related to reviewing and approving billing adjustments, implementing a formal password policy, and implementing a fixed asset system, all of which have been discussed with Paul, Ken, and their teams, and I believe everyone is in agreement with those findings and recommendations and have already implemented all or a portion of them at this point. So any comments or questions from the group? And I can't sorry. Yeah, the chat is so I apologize.
Any comments, anybody?
Okay.
I believe we are all good at this point. Thank you for your hard work.
And Amanda and Kristen, I know that you guys have other engagements and other clients you have to present to, so feel free to stay on or sign off and go on. So I hope you guys were able to hear us okay. Did this work out all right, or?
It worked out just fine. We actually use Teams all day, every day, so
Okay.
we're used to this, and yeah, hopefully it worked well for you all as well.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. And like I said, we'll kind of keep working forward and trying to get everything finalized before middle of December so we can get this issued to our creditors by the first of the year and stuff. So,
Yeah, that is not a problem at all, Ken. I was actually talking to Paul just before the meeting, and I think we can issue these standalone financial statements with a different audit report date than the combined financial statements with the city. So we can likely get these out in the very near future if you guys are interested in doing so.
okay. Well, thank you all very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
All right, thanks. You too.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. Bye. Okay, no, I appreciate that. I hope that worked out well for you between quarantine and people working remotely and stuff. We thought we'd go ahead and try this opportunity because they're trying to limit travel as well for their employees and exposure as well. So kind of with the audit being wrapped up and presented, the next item we have is Corey Mahaffey's here from the Hannibal Regional Economic Development. Gosh, what is it, committee or conference or? HR to EDC? Yeah, council. And, really for the last few months, we've been working really, really hard on trying to identify a sustainable funding solution for stormwater infrastructure. We've been working with Corey and his group and the city and our own staff to try to figure out the best way to approach some things. The one thing that came out of those meetings was maybe the benefit of a community improvement district or a neighborhood improvement district. And so he was wanting to have the opportunity to come and present it to the board and answer any questions you guys may have. The one thing that will ultimately, if this proves out to be something that everybody wants to support and do, there'll be some dollars and monetary commitments that will be necessary to actually establish the improvement district, and Corey will be covering that today. So he's going to cover it kind of extensively. This is definitely for the board and getting familiar and comfortable with all these items and the background of it. So feel free to ask any questions and stuff. So, yeah. Thank you, Corey.
Okay, it's green. It's okay if I take this mask off. Is that all right with everybody? You might be able to understand me a little bit better without that, if that's okay. So thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about this again. I know in your last meeting we talked a little bit about the neighborhood improvement district specifically, but as I mentioned to you in that meeting, that's only one component of the three components that we're proposing on the community improvement district. And Ken and I talked about that and felt that it was important for you to sort of understand the entire program that we're proposing and what that means. And obviously there are benefits of all three areas to both business owners, building owners, citizens, visitors, BPW, and the city, right? And so we wanted to make sure to kind of go through that overall program and answer any questions that you might have. So I've got some slides there that I passed out to you. You may have them in your packets as well, but I brought those in case it's easier for you to look at those on paper. So I'll be referring to some of those as we go through. These first couple of slides, I won't spend as much time on. They're more really for the more public meetings that we have. And so I did want to mention that to you. We've had 4 or 5, maybe 6, I lost track, meetings with HHMC and other organizations, downtown building owners, business owners, people within the proposed district, talking with them about what we're going to go through with you here tonight. So that's why you see HHMC on the front slide, because this is what we've done in those public meetings as we've gone through. I won't spend much time on these 2 front slides because it's really talking about the importance of historic districts in a community, and I know you all understand that, but I do want to point out why I put these 2 slides in there. One of those things is for people that visit our community, right? And another important aspect of that is people that are visiting our community and looking to make investment. I think all of you know in many of our rural communities, as we look at the older sections of town, particularly the historic districts, sometimes we see some decay over time. Sometimes we see some things that need to be addressed. And it's important for us to keep on top of that. And in our zoning maps, et cetera, as we look at some of these things, many of these areas are still called our central business district, right? For a reason. That's been our central business district for years and years and years. And so as people come in to look at our community, that area speaks to them about the economic vitality of our community, whether we want it to or not. And so that's an important reason why we talk about these first 2 slides and some of the things we're going to talk about with you tonight. The other thing on the second slide there is more geared towards people who live in the community, right? It's important to us that live in the community as well. And I think there's lots of things that we look at there, but I think the easiest thing for me to talk about there is where, what are sort of the businesses or the landmarks in the area that make our community special, right? What makes Hannibal different from other communities? And so you see that a lot of times when people are taking wedding pictures or engagement pictures or anniversary pictures or, graduation pictures. Where are those landmarks, right, that people use for those things? That's what makes us different. And many of those things are what we're going to talk about in this district a little bit this afternoon. And so the reason those 2 slides are there, again, not going into all of that, though, is it helps people understand why our community, how it differentiates from other communities, and these are important pieces of that. But that last bullet point where it says 2/3 choose city first on the second slide, I want to spend a little time there because I think that's an important paradigm shift in workforce development that really leads to why we're having this discussion today about a downtown community improvement district. So when I graduated from high school, which was 1988, you can do the math and see how old I am. When I graduated from school and when I graduated from college, my friends alike, during that period of time, what you normally did was you look for a job and you moved to wherever that job took you, right? Throughout my career, I've moved to where my jobs have taken me. You probably have done similar things, right? Throughout your career. And so that was sort of the norm. I have a friend of mine that I graduated high school with in 1988 at Quincy High School. He got an internship his freshman year of college, our freshman year of college, with a large company out of Rochester, Minnesota. He lives in Rochester, Minnesota to this day, right? That was sort of the normal path. What I want you to see there in that last bullet is 2/3, according to recent statistics, 2/3 of college graduates today do the reverse of that. 2/3 of college graduates today look for the place they want to live first, and then they look for a job. And so savvy communities are using that to their advantage, right? Savvy communities are working on placemaking, working on lots of advantages, particularly in the rural areas that we have, right? We talk about historic buildings. Sometimes we see those as negatives. Sometimes we see those as challenges, especially those that are falling in and those kind of things that are going on. However, right, in rural communities, we have blocks and blocks of those, whereas in larger communities, they're tearing down blocks and blocks of those to build new football stadiums and baseball stadiums, et cetera. So it does provide an advantage for us as we look at those. But that paradigm shift really means that people are looking for walkable downtowns. They're looking for trail systems. They're looking for historic buildings where they can live on a second or a third floor and have a river view, right? They're looking for maybe even a place where they can own the building, live on the second or third floor, and then own a business in the bottom floor, right? And so we're kind of coming full circle from where we were years ago, right, coming back to that today. And so that creates some advantages for us, and that's why we're talking about this downtown community improvement district and the proposal of that. And so that gives us some opportunities that we have here in rural areas. So one thing I want to mention before we get into the approach, I want to make sure I'm very clear about this, and every time we do a meeting, there have been no decisions made about a downtown community improvement district. Everything we talk about today are ideas. These are the types of things that could be done, assuming we were to move forward with this. So when we talk about boundaries of a district, there are no boundaries. I might propose some to you, but there are no boundaries. When we talk about programs, there have been no decisions made about property tax or sales tax or any of those things. So keep that in mind. These are just ideas for discussion purposes of the types of things that we could potentially do to encourage growth in our community. So if you see there on the next slide, approach to downtown revitalization, it talks about a combination of incentive tools. What we're proposing are three things. I gave you a one-pager last time. You've got that again this time that talks about those three things. One is a community improvement district, and I'll go through these individually. The second is Chapter 353 real estate tax abatement, and then the third is a neighborhood improvement district, which we talked more in depth with you about in our last meeting, because that's specific to infrastructure improvements. The goals of this program is to minimize the cost of downtown businesses, but also to encourage growth. The real goal is to take the buildings that we have in the proposed boundaries and put them back to where they used to be, right? Creating the property tax dollars, personal property tax dollars, and sales tax dollars and jobs that they should be creating. And that's kind of the goal as we go through this that you'll hear. So it gives us a broad front program that you see there. It allows us to do some coordinated promotion, whether that's event promotion and those types of things. One thing I want to mention to you is we are at risk a little bit here. I've spent a lot of time with HHMC. Mike's here. He can talk with you about that. Some of the meetings that I've been in, especially with smaller groups of HHMC, as you know, the majority of our events, 100 plus or so a year we have, are done by volunteers running those committees. And those folks are running their businesses full time, and they are tired, right? There are people that are nearing being done with some of these promotions, and that should scare you like it scares me when we start to talk about the importance of those events to our community. So this is a way, right, that we can provide some funding that could potentially help with that. Physical property improvements would be a part of that. We'll talk more about that. Infrastructure, of course, we'll talk a lot about that because that's really what is pertinent to you. So what I want to share with you, I've been involved in a number of different community improvement districts over the years, some with this format, some with others. The last one that I was involved in that is most pertinent to this one, or closely related to this one, is one that was done in downtown Moberly, which is called the Depot District in downtown Moberly. And I just want to share some numbers before we get into this so you can kind of get a feel for the impact of what these programs could do. In that particular district, when we started, we did the blight study. There were 157 properties associated in about a 10-block district when we were working on that. Within those 157 properties, there were 38 empties, first floor only. That doesn't count second floor. So obviously, pretty significantly economically underutilized area, right? Of those 157 properties, the total assessed value at the time we did the blight study was $3.2 million. So pretty dangerous. And so in the first 6 months after the program was announced, there was already $3.7 million of new private investment going on within that district. So from 3.2 total to 3.7 in 6 months. Just a few months ago, you may have seen I shared some information that the city of Moberly announced through the Community Improvement District, a $14 million boutique hotel is now being built, slated to be built in downtown Moberly, that will also include a parking garage and a few other things that are going on with that. So you can see some pretty quick turnarounds, some pretty quick changes, obviously, with these types of programs. I share those with you just to give you an idea. We'll talk a little bit here in a second about other communities that have used these programs, and Missouri Main Street and others that use them. So they're not new programs, they're proven programs, and I think we'll see similar results from that. The next slide talks about the Community Improvement District in particular. This is an actual district with boundaries that would be drawn. We literally draw that by property lines, right? So what we have proposed so far is all of the downtown district up Broadway and up Mark Twain Avenue to Grand Avenue on both sides. That's sort of what we've been talking about in these meetings so far, but one of the next steps in this process, once we've identified our legal fees and moving that forward, would be to have some more public meetings to make some large maps that would show what those districts might look like and then get feedback, right, from building owners and landowners within those proposed districts to see what that might eventually look like. So that's sort of the next step in that process. It would allow us to establish up to is an important piece of that, a full cent additional sales tax within the district, which would be one of our revenue sources. I say up to because that's done in 1/8 cent increments, up to 1 full cent. So that's obviously part of the negotiation that we would have in discussions with City Council and others where we might put that. You can see there our current sales tax rate's 8.35%. And so that would be a special tax within the district only. Okay, everything we talk about today is only within this district. That would not do anything outside of this district. Okay, so it could be up to a full cent additional sales tax. Then the CID would also collect the additional sales tax to use as a public financing mechanism. But again, it can only fund projects within the CID. So the revenues have to be collected within the CID boundaries. The revenues have to be spent within the CID boundaries. So we could not put a community improvement district in place in downtown and go do something out on the west end with those funds. Okay, anything collected in the CID needs to be spent within the CID. So projects could include facade improvements, revolving loan funds, rent abatements, promotions, parks, banners, and signage. I know one of the things HHMC talks about a lot is their cleaning services. It could include cleaning services and security. I think it could help the city and BPW on ongoing flood maintenance with gates and pumps and other things that the levee district was originally established to deal with. I think this could be a replacement revenue opportunity for that, for the levee district long term. So that's one thing in the community improvement district that could be established is up to an additional 1% sales tax within that district. The next slide talks about the Chapter 353 tax abatement. So I will tell you that a lot of times when CID is used, especially in larger areas, a CID tax is imposed on top of the normal property tax. In this case, we're not proposing that because frankly our downtown businesses probably would not fare well with that. What we're proposing is a Chapter 353 tax abatement in the same amount or percentage that we would increase the taxes through the community improvement district. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is if I paid $500 for my downtown building and real property taxes this year, I would still pay it next year. The difference is we're taking it from the taxing jurisdictions and we're putting it in the community improvement district. Okay, so that's why you see there we're proposing a tax neutral scenario. They'll still pay their taxes, they just pay it to the community improvement district instead of the taxing jurisdictions. One thing to remember there is we are only talking about real property taxes, so the personal property taxes would continue to flow to the taxing jurisdictions as it does today. So obviously as new projects come on board, as new businesses come in, as new residents come in, those property taxes then immediately kick new dollars back to the taxing jurisdictions as a part of this, and they'll see that in the tax impact statement that we'll build to show what that looks like.
Hey, Corey,
Yes, sir.
the CID that you're experienced with in Moberly enticed someone to build a hotel with parking. Can you give me just a boots on the ground example of once the CID was in place, what part of it gave some new investor a reason to want to build a hotel down there?
So there's multiple revenue streams that are associated with this, part of which we've talked about, which is the sales tax piece, and the part of which we're about to talk about, which is the property tax piece. Those revenues then come back to the community improvement district that they can use for some of the things I mentioned earlier, revolving loan funds, rent abatements, those types of
In that
things.
example, some person, some company, some investment group said, I think putting a hotel down there would make sense
Right.
because of
Property tax abatement, development fees, lots of different things that could be done. So that's all up to the community improvement district. That list I gave you just a second ago of those things.
I'm trying to understand, in that example that you mentioned, the owners, the people who put the money in to make that hotel, what feature?
Property tax abatement was the biggest feature.
So they were incentivized by, look, there's a piece of property that I can buy right now, it's real cheap, and the taxes on that will be abated somehow, so
Correct.
that once I build this and the value goes way up, my taxes won't go up.
Correct.
So,
For a period of time, correct. So, and that's one of the things that the city district can do is use property tax abatement. They can use sales tax rebates for building materials, for instance, when they build the hotel. We offer that through the city right now on some of the projects that we do. where somebody comes in and builds a new facility or adds on to a facility or renovates a facility. B&B Theater, for instance, I think we offered that too. Several others we've done that with. The building materials that they buy and equipment that they buy as a part of that initial project, we would rebate. We would collect first the sales tax and rebate that back to them. So there's multiple different things that could be used as incentives.
If they're using local.
Correct, if they use local contractors. So those are just a couple of examples. In that case, there was also a development fee that was paid up to a percentage of that. So those are programs that we use every day
Paid to who, from where?
to the developers for building that facility.
Okay.
So-
Question on the tax neutral.
Sure.
If I can interrupt you.
Yep, no problem.
Bill, can you turn your mic on?
Thank you. Question on the tax neutral.
Uh-huh.
As it might, let's assume it's Main Street. Just
Yep.
that's your district. The taxing is distributed back to, or the tax collected is distributed back to that district,
To the community improvement
to the
district.
community.
Correct.
Does it impact the schools?
Yes.
And have you run numbers on that, or at
No.
least open that conversation with them?
So
You
we,
got your tax bill this week too, huh?
so we
That's all right.
have not had those conversations yet because I don't have anything to tell them yet. Until we've established the boundaries, I don't know what those numbers are. So that's the first step in the process is to talk. They know in generalities that we're having these conversations, that we're looking at this. And so a couple things I would say to that. One is until we have the boundaries and I know how many properties are within that boundaries and what they pay in property tax, I can't tell the school this is what we're looking at. I need to know which properties are in and which properties are out to do that. Once we get to that point, based on their tax bills they get, I can give those numbers to them immediately.
People are afraid of what they don't know.
Sure.
And so
Yeah,
it's the
so-
explanation.
But in this case, you have to get to the point where you have the boundaries to be able to do that. The other piece for them is we will run you heard me reference earlier, a 20-year tax impact statement. Typically, when we run those for the last 20 years and then the next 20 years. Typically, when you look at the previous, there's usually a revenue decline associated with that as some of these buildings have declined and people have moved out and they're empty buildings and those types of things going on. So the school districts and the other taxing jurisdictions are typically on a negative scenario, where this program, with certain assumptions obviously that we make in the tax impact statement and we share with them, shows them a way that using these programs we can shore that up and then begin to send it back the other direction.
So in your example of Moberly, what was the schools?
So there's 11 taxing jurisdictions involved in that conversation. 10 of those came out publicly in favor. One stood neutral. The stood neutral was the school district because they had a bond issue coming up. And so they were concerned what that might look like when they were trying to pass a bond issue. I will tell you that program started out as an 8-year payback. It's a 19-year program. It started out as an 8-year payback based on the assumptions we have, but they are way ahead of schedule given some of the investments that you've heard about. So that's all things that we'll have conversations with them once we figure out what the boundaries are going to be and we have numbers to share with them. We'll run those tax impact statements and go and talk with them, show them what the last 20 years look like, show them what the next 20 years look like on the same trajectory, or what they could look like if we put these programs in place based on certain assumptions.
Thank you.
So that's usually the way that conversation goes. So SID sales tax, again, a number of those things that we could potentially offer. That's up to the Community Improvement District Board when it's established what types of programs they want to offer moving forward. But one of the things we have talked about is this revenue opportunity to deal with what was done originally by the levy district that we no longer have anymore, which is going to be an issue for us with gates and pumps and lots of things for a long time to come, obviously, right? So 353 on the tax abatement, again, we're proposing tax neutral. Again, remember, it's real property only. It could be up to 25 years. I mentioned to you the Moberly, when Bill asked about the Moberly project is 19 years. The way we came up to that number was we looked at what particularly the NID improvements needed to be, right, for the infrastructure. That's the expensive part of this, what that might look like from a bonding perspective, and then those shared costs associated with that, and then other programs we wanted to put in place, and then backed into that number based on the revenues we would have from a property tax and a sales tax. How many years will we need to run that to be able to cover the expenses that we were trying to cover with that? So that's what we would propose here as well. The last piece, the Neighborhood Improvement District, I spent a little bit of time with you on in your last meeting. That would be a municipal bond offering funding significant public infrastructure improvements. It's backed by the limited full faith and credit of the city only, not tax-based or tax-backed, excuse me. It would be for, special projects, and those would be to be determined, right? That's the conversations that Ken alluded to earlier that we're having in these community development meetings with Matt and Ken and others talking about stormwater and other things that need to be done. So what we're saying here, these are things that need to be done by BPW and the city anyway. What we're trying to provide with this opportunity is sort of a discounted rate, right? Where the CID and the city and BPW share in that. So types of projects, again, could be sewer, could be stormwater, could be gates and pumps, those types of things. The last bullet point is what I think I talked with you about last time that's important to this conversation is the revenues generated by the CID would partially offset the mid payments. I've mentioned the Moberly CID. In that case, there was a 60-40 split. So the city of Moberly is paying 60% of the bond payments. The CID is paying 40% of the bond payments on all the infrastructure improvements they're making. So the carrot in this case to the city and BPW would be some sort of negotiated scenario on a discount for work that you have to do anyway within that district. As Ken and I have talked about, that then allows you to take dollars away from what you might have had to target here at 100% and push those someplace else in town and use those. I think that's a great message for you to be able to say we're leveraging these programs to save the taxpayers money, but then move that money in other areas. And then, of course, I think there's a whole list of benefits, frankly, to the city and to BPW, so I just wanted to share a couple of those with you really quickly. Obviously, we have an economically underutilized area. I mean, we have a tremendous downtown, let's be honest, for a community our size. But we do have some challenges down there. I mean, you about break your ankle on certain sidewalks, and we've got some empty buildings, and you know, we had some great, the Providence project, was that 20, 30 years ago? I mean, there's been some great investment from that, but that was 20, 30 years ago, right? We're starting to see even on some of those buildings some wear and tear. We've seen some painting, some other things going on. That's great to see. But even some of those original investments are starting to get to the point where they need to be addressed. And so this is a way that we can do that. Obviously, buildings for new businesses that are looking. Living space, we're seeing more and more people interested in downtown living space. Again, goes back to that walkable downtown scenario, the trail systems, the connections to Sedalis, et cetera. And then, of course, improvements on the buildings increases our revenues, right? It increases our real property taxes, our personal property taxes, our sales taxes, and then, of course, utility revenue as well. The tax levy and abatements only apply within that district, so whatever we do is only within that district. I think that's a great argument for the downtown folks, because we certainly have this argument throughout the community that you're aware of, that there are certain folks on the west side of the community that think we spend all of our money in downtown. Well, guess what? Downtown's paying for downtown under this scenario, right? So that ends that argument. Again, remember, revenues generated in the district are spent within the district. So the district's paying for its own way. Largely paid for, by the way, by visitors as they come in and pay the sales tax when they're purchasing items there. The special taxes, obviously, the CID board, the CID would be a separate political subdivision of the state of Missouri. So the original CID petition that the council will approve and put in place will establish the first community improvement district board, and then from there, obviously, there'll be staggered terms. But it is a separate political subdivision, just like a fire district. It will be its own separate political subdivision moving forward. Discounted costs on infrastructure improvements, we've sort of talked about that, obviously. I think one of the important things from a messaging perspective is the programs and improvements are largely paid for by our visitors. $500,000 a year, right, are going to help us pay for some of these things as opposed to doing it all on the backs of the taxpayers. And then again, some of those special programs, what those might look like over time. So I've got some frequently asked questions in there. I'm happy to go through with you if you want to, or I can answer any specific questions that you might have.
Corey, the CID board, the first one would be appointed by the council.
Correct.
Would the other ones in later years be elected by the district, or?
So typically it would be reappointed by council.
Okay.
It could be done either way. It could be done by the district board themselves with approval from the council, similar to what you all do here. So it kind of depends on how that master development agreement's written. So one of the things I did want to add to that, appreciate that question because that reminds me, I have always pushed for community improvement district boards or boards similar to that to have what I would call a majority public interest. Well, let's be honest, a sales tax or a property tax that we're using for these types of projects, those are public dollars. So in my mind, those boards need to be largely public driven. So there's public oversight of those dollars, right? Sometimes what you might see in a private scenario is a private developer setting up a community improvement district and they're their own board and they're lining their pockets. We're not proposing that. What we're proposing is if we had a 5-member board, for instance, or 7, 9, whatever that is, shorter the better, but 5, I would propose that you'd put 2 people from the city on there. Sometimes someone from my office also serves on there. So that's your 3 sort of quasi-public folks, and then 2 private business owners or folks from the HHMC, something like that. And again, that can be 7, 9, whatever. My scenario to you is I would highly recommend to the city council that just to show the public that there's public oversight of public dollars, that board be reflected in that way.
I guess, Corey, on the neighborhood improvement district, you know, on the side, the municipal bond offering. So the SID would be a political subdivision.
Correct.
The NID, or the neighborhood improvement district, is backed by the full faith and credit of the city.
Correct.
So if the infrastructure required a bond issue and we went for bonding, how would that work? I mean, does that make sense? I mean, does the city issue those bonds?
Correct. The NID bonds be issued by the city.
And then there would be an agreement between the city and the improvement district?
Yeah, and
on
here's
the
a little
funding
bit different
requirements
because
of that?
there is BPW, but BPW is the city.
Right.
So ultimately, we'd have to figure out what that development, how that development agreement needs to be reflected for that. But
Okay.
in essence, when I say city, I'm lumping city BPW, you are the city. So
Right.
in my mind, because of the structure we have here, in Moberly, we didn't have a Board of Public Works. You know, the public utilities were just under the city of Moberly, and so it was just issued by the city and done that way. In this case, it may be BPW on behalf of actually issuing those. I don't know what the best way to look at that would be, but we can certainly talk to council. I mean, James may have a feeling on that, or Joy, or our special counsel for economic development.
But the issuance of that debt would take a vote of the people to do that? Or
No.
would it, so once it's in the city, it wouldn't necessarily take, because it would
Correct.
just be for that improvement
The
district?
neighborhood improvement district does not.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Sure. And some of those things are dealt with in these frequently asked questions later in that too, so that we can get into. I'm just trying not to get too far in the weeds from a time perspective unless you all want to. I'm happy to answer any questions you know me, I'll talk about economic development till midnight. Sorry, Matt. So I'm happy to do that. So that kind of gives you a feel for the three-pronged approach. What we've really focused on with you is the neighborhood improvement district, because that's where I think you have value and you can show value to the community by sort of leveraging those other resources out there to help you save some money along the way. We did get a memo for the city council from our special counsel for economic development talking about what it would take to put these programs in place. There's a stepwise program that talks about how each of these things would be done. Within that memo, it was quoted somewhere between $60,000 and $75,000, I believe it was, in legal expenses for the initial setup. That does not include bond underwriting, so obviously when we get to that point on the neighborhood improvement district side, that'll be a whole separate thing that's usually, as you all know from your experience, lumped into the bond offering. But just for SID petitions and dealing with all of that, as you can imagine, if we're talking 100+ properties within this SID, everyone owns their buildings. Some are in a trust, some are in personal names, some are in business names, some have loans against those buildings, some do not. So, there's a lot of work involved in this SID petition process and then getting to the point where we can achieve tax abatement and some of the things that we've talked about. So there's a significant amount of work. And so, but the estimate's based on the Moberly process that I mentioned to you, as well as other folks that this particular firm has helped with. And so that was my goal in reaching out to Ken and to you. What we'd like to do is to identify a revenue source to forward fund the $60,000 to $75,000 in legal expenses so that we can move forward and get moving on this project. Those would be paid back through the community improvement district once revenues are flowing in the district. I would tell you, as you can imagine, year one will not have a lot of revenues. It'll basically just be the sales tax dollars. And then year two, obviously, as the property tax dollars start to roll in, then you'll see some more significant revenues. And so you're probably looking at a 2 to 3 year payback of the $60,000 to $70,000, $75,000. And so I want to be clear about that. Obviously, we won't pay it back day one of the SID. But in essence, what we're requesting from you is consideration for what I would call a loan to the SID for legal expenses moving forward, with obviously the caveat that we'd be paying that back over time through the SID revenues.
Do you know approximately how many vacant properties, maybe Mike could go into this, but they're down there?
I don't. I haven't done an official blight study. I mean, that'd be one of the first things we do once we've got the attorney engaged, and they would send someone up and we literally walk the streets.
It depends on where you go.
Yeah, I think when you get into that Mark Twain Avenue and Broadway sections, there's going to be more there than what you might see on Main Street. Right. There are a couple on Main Street, though. I mean, we're involved with a couple people that are looking at leasing those right now, so I know there are a couple of empties there. I think there's more second floor empties on Main Street right now, which obviously this program can address as well. I think we're doing fairly well on Main Street on the first floors. Once you get past Broadway, it gets a little different. And obviously, we'd like to target that area as well as a part of this to help incentivize some development. But I can get you that number. I'd hate to hazard a guess at this point.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
I walk by him every day, but I don't count. I'm sorry.
There's gotta be a good commercial appraiser that knows that number off the top of his
He
head.
might be on this call. I don't know. James is on here. He does title work, right? He might know too.
That's different than an appraiser.
Well, that's true.
I don't know, the Central Park Neighborhood District, Bob Yap or Pat Yap might have an idea.
That's possible.
Of the residential section.
Yeah.
That you're considering.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we are trying to keep this particular one separate from that residential piece from a revenue perspective, especially since we're doing the sales tax component of that. Yeah, so this would be more commercial properties. You know, there may be a few spots, obviously, where people live on second floors, or we may have a house, obviously, in between, you know, commercial properties or something like that, depending on where we, you know, if we draw it at the alley, who knows? There may be some residential folks included in that, but I have talked with some of those folks. I know Martin Meyer asked me in the last HHMC about residential. Obviously, we can put a similar scenario in place there to do some of the same things without the sales tax component, because they don't obviously generate on the residential side sales tax. So we could certainly do that, and I would advocate keeping those separate. But yes, we definitely can help with that as well. HHMC, Chamber of Commerce, HREDC, the City Council now. I mean, I think everyone is in favor, obviously, of moving this forward. Most of the work that we've done with the downtown folks has been through HHMC. I mean, we haven't gotten in front of every single building owner and business owner in downtown. Obviously, that's not easy to do. That would be the next step in the process. If we identify these funds and move forward, engage the attorney, we would then send notices to all the folks that own property and businesses within the proposed district that we're starting with, and start having more public meetings. Obviously, as you can imagine, some of those folks live in other states and won't be available, so we'll have to, I mean, in the past, I've had to hire translators as an example, because some of those folks didn't speak English, and so we had to, so it'll be a process. It takes some time to get that done.
What's the timeframe for needing funding?
Well, that's kind of the next step, to engage the attorneys. We're kind of on hold with that at this point, so obviously the sooner the better for us to be able to get started on that. However, you know, obviously, I realize people have to deal with budgets and those types of things as well. But we're literally to the point now with the council's sign off that once we have those expenses identified, the funding identified, we can move forward. We'd get then an agreement for the council to sign.
If the whole 1% sales tax levy gets put in there, would that entire amount go to fund the SID?
Correct. So it's only the 1%. So the 835 would still go to its normal scenario. The full additional cent on top of that would go back to the community improvement district. Correct.
You mentioned a separation between residential and business, but I didn't catch that discussion.
So some of the historic districts in downtown have mentioned interest in similar programs. These have been used on the residential side as well. Community improvement district that generates some funding opportunities. The challenge here is that we're proposing a sales tax. Obviously, homes don't create sales tax. And so if we were to do a residential one, I am recommending that we keep those separate for two reasons. One, obviously there's no sales tax on that side, but two, one of the components of this, as you'll see in the frequently asked questions, is when we get ready to impose whatever that sales tax is going to be, we will have a mail-in ballot from people who are both registered to vote and reside within the district to do that. Okay, so of the 157 properties I mentioned to you from Marbley earlier, that was 13 people. So 13 people voted in that, 12 voted in favor and 1 didn't vote. So it won't be as many people as you think. However, the more people that you put into that, obviously, who may not have come to a meeting and don't understand that that's not a citywide sales tax, that's just within the district and yada, 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 it creates more difficulty in passing that, to be quite honest. And so that's another reason why I think the commercial SID and the residential scenario should be separated.
So conceptually, the SID would have a geography that would have businesses and residences in there?
Well, the goal would be to limit residences, but yes, I mean, it probably would, depending on, I mean, there are some people that live on second floors of commercial buildings, so they would be included in that, yes. Right now, we want the downtown business district up Broadway to Grand Avenue and up Mark Twain Avenue to Grand Avenue. So to the extent there are separate residential facilities within that, then they would likely be included unless we drew around them with the SID.
So every owner of every business or piece of real estate?
Real estate.
Real estate.
Some are both, as you mentioned. But you'll see in the frequently asked questions that we can do that either through a special warranty deed back and forth to achieve the tax abatement, or a lease scenario back and forth to achieve the tax abatement under Chapter 353. We would likely use a lease scenario. Technically, the lease could also be done with a tenant. So the tenant could sublease to the 353 and back and forth. So the goal would be to do this with all the owners. That's the quickest and cleanest way to do that. But if we were not able to get a hold of a building owner, for instance, if we could do something with the tenant, that would accomplish the same thing. So those are weeds questions, but it's part of the process, right? Yeah, of identifying those folks.
So at this point, at least in my head, I would kind of like staff to give us some feedback about budget impact, the legality of how to, in other words, how logistically, how do we do this or not do this? In other words, what's the obviously there's some benefits, but some not benefits. The upside down case. Can we do that? Do we have, without holding up the train? I mean, we're looking at a month. If we, have it on next month's agenda.
No.
Is this a reasonable approach? Is the question.
I think it's very much so. The one that we've all been working together on, Martin Street's kind of getting addressed, and Matt's going to give a highlight on that project. The community development block grant that we were able to receive proceeds for Union Street, we're out for requests for qualifications for that, so we'll have a better idea going forward. And all those are kind of running on track with what we had anticipated. Obviously, Martin Street bids came in a little bit higher. We're getting North Street kind of wrapped up on getting the scope of it defined. And like I said, we've all been trying to work together and, with a clean slate, determine where the best approach and funding solution would come for aging infrastructure. And obviously this district is where we've got some of our most aged infrastructure. So that's kind of part of the budgeting process. It sounds like this might have some validity to it. So let us go back and put some of this together. We're meeting regularly, try to identify the funding. I think everybody's supportive of just doing what's in the best interest. I think we're kind of finding out with Martin Street and some of this that it impacts us all. You just can't go out there and improve stormwater without impacting roads. You can't improve roads without impacting stormwater and water renewal. So to answer your question, Bill, I think we can put together something and bring it back to the board next month, and that would give you guys a chance to ask any other questions you get with Corey on, but we could put something together if that's your desires, to go that route. So
it's informational, but it's also best practices kind of thing. As I asked Corey the last time, looking at outside funding sources besides Board of Public Works, that analysis, what are those impacts? To getting a positive solution.
And we're hoping maybe even next month that you'll have our capital improvement plan for the next 5 years before you and stuff, because we're kind of working pretty hard on it. So this is pretty good timing for both of those initiatives. So.
So, Corey, God forbid, what happens if we put this money toward the project and it fails?
Yeah, so I can't say that can't happen, because I guess that could happen.
I recognize that, yeah.
But really the only way it could happen is the value proposition, right? So I've mentioned to you there are 1/8 increments on the sales tax side up to 1%. The reality is with the sales taxes that are being produced in this district right now, given where we're at today, we're going to want and need a full cent. Otherwise, it may not make sense. I mean, by the time we spend legal expenses and other things, it's going to be the same thing on the property tax side, honestly. I mean, I don't have those dollars because we don't have the boundaries, but once we get those, I mean, it's going to have to be 100% or something really darn close to it to make sense. And so I would see that being the only way that it would not move forward, is if, say, people were only willing to go with a 0.5 cent and 50% tax abatement. We would just have to make a decision that, we can't do that. Some of these programs only have a 25-year limit. We wouldn't be able to get it done in 25 years with those limited fundings. So I think that's I shouldn't say the only way, but to me, that's the biggest risk. But right now, just based on the conversations we've had, I mean, you all know this. I mean, you shop in TIF districts and SID districts all the time. You know, when you're buying small ticket items, most of the time you don't even know that. I mean, I can tell you where you spend a full cent additional sales tax today. You may not may not believe me, trust me, whatever, but you do if you look at the receipt. So
You did at Walmart a couple years ago.
sure.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So,
Nobody ever did it.
I mean, normally,
And they'll be back.
Sure.
and that's a legitimate question. I mean, that came up with the downtown business owners, legitimate question. It does. I mean, in Moberly, as an example, our first public meeting we had there was 60, 70 people there. I asked them how many of them ate at Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut's in a community improvement district in Moberly. And every hand in the place went up, right? Over the last 30 days, they'd all eaten there. Well, you paid a full cent additional sales tax. They just didn't. Some of them argued with me. I'm like, we'll go out tomorrow and get a buffet and see you're paying $9,475. Well, how do you know that? Because I put it in place 10 years ago, right? So it's a legitimate question, certainly, from business owners especially. You don't want them to have an unfair advantage one way or another, right? However, for the most part, people, especially the taxing jurisdictions, generally look at, okay, we've got some declining revenues here. We need to figure out a way to put that on a positive trajectory, and these are the programs that have been successful in other communities doing that, and usually that wins out. So,
I guess my biggest concern is we don't need another black eye.
I understand. Yeah. Yep.
We make plenty of our own.
I understand. Yeah. Well, I'm not looking for that either. So,
Okay, okay.
But I mean, I think given HHMC's support, our organization, the chamber, the city council support, I mean, I'm not, like I said, we have not engaged every single building owner and business owner. We've tried to do that through HHMC. It's sort of the group that has the majority of those folks. They've invited other people that aren't normally a part of HHMC to some of these meetings. But I'm telling you, all of that has been positive.
I don't know of anybody in any of those meetings that hasn't been on board.
Yeah.
That's good to,
Now, we're going to have that. I mean, we're going to have that. I can tell you in another meeting when we have more time how we deal with that, but we're going to have that.
okay.
But trust me, there are ways at the 11th hour that's going to get taken care of. So,
Well, it sounds like next month we'll get a little closer to making that decision.
great. Thank you all. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is that basically you're wanting a set of pros and a set of cons.
Yeah, what are the options?
So, but what are the cons? You know, because this district is gonna provide money for, fix the infrastructure. And you know, the biggest infrastructure down there is the levee. You know, the gates, if it was in place now, it could have fixed maybe, 30-40% of, the North Street, storm sewer down there. I just don't see the cons.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, the next item we have is really the operations report, and Matt Munslinger is going to come up and kind of present those items and stuff, so.
Sure.
Good afternoon. Just want to give you an update on the water plant project. We're basically just wrapping it up, just doing a few minor revisions. We've got some control stuff that we're continuing to work out, but they're working under their warranty period at this point in time. So for all intents purposes, that project's closed out and we're moving forward. We're also meeting with the engineers and the plant personnel. Will be going over time frame for the first change out of the GAC material. Trying to get on a schedule. It's nothing that has to be done today. It's something that's in the budget, and so we'll see when it fits in Calgon's schedule and make sure we're evaluating the right stuff before we give them the go ahead to change out the material. And to kind of get on those lines, we've already got a price of what the change outs are going to cost us for the first 3 years. So that was something that they bid when they bid the material at the beginning. So sewer side of things, we're continuing to plot along on trying to get the information together to provide the DNR on the downtown SSO project. That's something we owe them an update in January for, so working on that. Patchen Street, we still get high flows at that lift station when we get heavy rains, especially when the ground's saturated. So that's something, once we get off of raising manholes that we'll be focused on again this winter, trying to maybe replace some manholes that are old, laid up stone manholes that allow a lot of groundwater in. We're going to start there and see what type of progress we can make. Stormwater, we still got the availability of Black and Beach to provide any information that we request. It's kind of in a holding pattern until we determine which way we want to go on funding source. We have moved forward and authorized a aerial photography collection that would allow us to do the impervious fee if we choose to go that way. We did that so that we went ahead and got on that list, and they'll probably do that February of next year. We can utilize that photography in all facets of the utility, whether we're going to plan a new water line or new electrical line or whatnot. So we thought it was prudent to go ahead and move forward, and at least we had that information should we decide to go down that road. Martin Street storm sewer, it's progressed pretty well. They've had pretty decent weather to do that construction. We had planned 2 weeks to have Fulton Avenue closed. It ran a few days longer than that just because there was some rain toward the end of their second week, and then the temperatures were pretty cold for that time of year, and they couldn't get asphalt to lay down properly. So I think it was the Wednesday of 28th, I think is when it was. We had it back open late that night. So, and now the contractor is continuing to progress down Martin Street. They're taking taking the storm sewer and the sanitary sewer, laying it down the full length of the street, and then they'll come back and connect the water that they had already stubbed across Fulton Avenue and take it down the street. Right now they're a little more than halfway with the storm sewer and everything installed. They ran into some rock, and so they're having to bust out about 18 inches of rock to get the sanitary and the storm sewer installed. So it slowed up progress a little bit, but right now they're just about to get past all the houses on the west side, I guess it would be. So should be making pretty decent progress. So. North Street, we're continuing to work with FEMA on reimbursement of that temporary repair and payment for the permanent repair. We've also been in contact with the Corps of Engineers. They're still looking like they'll have their plans ready to go out to bid at the end of the year. The funding source that they have set aside for that project, they've ran out of funds for it, but there is another funding bill that is in front of Congress now. They're just waiting for approval on it. So once they get that funding approved, then they'll go ahead and bid out to their project and hopefully be able to complete it if there are no spring floods. Just depends on what the river level does. So, but we're continuing to work on that, and then PSBA is continuing to work on the final design of the complete replacement of that storm sewer up through there. So, a lot of existing utilities and whatnot. They're trying to work on how to stage the project so that we can cause as little impact to the businesses as we can, but then also minimize the conflict with these other utilities. So, and then the tie line between Oakwood Substation and Southside Substation, BHMG is continuing to finalize those plans. Hopefully, have those plans ready to go out to bid here toward the end of the year, and get prices on that. And it's not something that's dire that we do right now, so we're going to give them a little bit of time and let the contractor kind of determine their own schedule. Hopefully, get a better price on it. So that's all I've got. Unless y'all have any questions.
Any questions?
No, I've talked to a few people who've been in and around the diversion and who live there, and nothing bad at all. It's just like, hey, look what's getting done. That's really the consensus. I think that's great.
Yep, talked with the inspector with Peppingstone, Bach and Associates. He said that everybody down there has been pretty pleasant to work with, and they understand the need for the disruption, and so They haven't had any problems that I've been aware of. We've had to add some more signage a couple of times, or there was something else we had to do at one time, but I was fixed the street up at Ann and Booker, I think it was, where the trucks turning the corner created a hole. But other than that, pretty minor for what we're doing in that area. So,
Matt, do you know if the project for the core would require the triangle piece of shaped property to the north?
they're planning not to.
Plan not to?
Yep. Plan on utilizing piling.
Okay.
If there's no other questions, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back. I'm going to turn on, we've got the financial report next. So, Paul, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes. Yep, I'm here. Hopefully you don't lose me or anything.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn over the financial report to you. You're next on the agenda, so
Alrighty.
feel free to start.
Okay, thanks, Kim. So October 2020, starting with the balance sheet there. So cash increased this month. That was primarily due to that interfund loan modification that we made last month from the electric fund to the stormwater fund. Payables went up just a little bit this month. And overall, total assets are only about 1% higher than last month and also a year ago. Jumping down now to the income statements. First one there is comparing October of 2020 to the budget. We had a weak month this month. Overall, utility-wide net income is about 60% less than what we budgeted. Really, this is due to lower than budgeted operating revenues in all three funds. You can see there it was 12%, 4%, and 6% less for the electric, water, and sewer funds, respectively. Those shortfalls were more than the decreases in purchase power costs and operating expenses for the electric fund and water fund, respectively. We continue to see significantly lower operating expenses in the water fund. This continues to be driven by reduced expenditures of materials. So next page there is going to be our current month compared to the same month last year. Utility-wide net income was 270% more than the same month a year ago. So we had worse results this year in the sewer fund, but those were offset by improved results in the water fund and significantly better results in the electric fund. Compared to last year, we had much lower purchase power costs in the electric fund, and that was the primary reason for the increase in net income this year. Kilowatt hour sales, the actual kilowatt hour sales were down about 18% from the same month a year ago, which tells you how much lower purchase power costs were this year. We're now 4 months into our new fiscal year, so if we look at our year-to-date actual compared to the budget, utility-wide net income is about 12%, or $213,000 less than budgeted. But we continue to see that unfavorable trend. The primary driver continues to be lower than budgeted operating revenues in the electric fund. This is mainly caused by the reduced kilowatt hour sales when we compare that to a year ago. We're about $84.8 million units, or sorry, 84.8 million units this year compared to just under 91 million kilowatt hours last year. Next page there is our year-to-date actual compared to the same year-to-date in the prior year. So we're now a third of the way into our fiscal year, and utility-wide net income is only about 1% or $12,000 less than it was at the same time period last year. Again, lower operating revenues in the electric and water funds are more than offsetting lower operating expenses for all three funds, and significantly lower purchase power costs in the electric fund, like I mentioned. Also keep in mind that we did not have Wells County public water supply at all this year, and had been for a couple months last year. So overall, we've had a weak start to the fiscal year. It's discouraging, but I believe it can mainly be attributed to the mild weather that we've experienced this far. That hasn't changed so far. And we also have the unusual circumstances of operating during a pandemic. I really believe that citizens have overall become more conscientious of what they're spending. I know that seems true for my same household, so we can all kind of probably relate to that. So there's still plenty of time for these unfavorable trends to reverse themselves over the remainder of the fiscal year. However, we will have to take a look at this week start when we go to start preparing the budget here over the next couple months. As it's likely that we're going to be operating under similar circumstances going forward. Any questions on any of the financial statements for October?
Yeah.
So, everything else on there is the normal stuff. We've got our check register. I apologize, it says the month of September. Obviously, that is October. And then our cash reserve, members, targets, as well as our investment listing, showing interest rates and maturities of our investments, and then the dashboard, which shows various graphs and other financial information. Questions on any of the financial report for October?
I do not think there are any questions, Paul. Thank you.
Paul, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You know, I think the one thing we're going to kind of monitor really closely with the financial information is the unit sales. You know, we're starting to see a consistent trend of them being below budget and below prior years. I think we're going to try to start coming up with a little bit better intelligence on how much of it's weather-driven versus how much is COVID-driven versus just how much the overall economy is getting impacted by it. This last month, we actually had to file our MISO capacity reporting requirements. BHM&G helps us perform those numbers, and we're down to about 58.7 megawatts, you know, compared to 2017 at 62.3 is what we reported. So we're kind of seeing a decline in capacity requirements as well as overall unit sales. So,
I did, yeah, we lost them there.
okay,
Is your mic muted on the iPad?
it is now. Yeah, no, that's fine. But those are some of the things we're going to watch and probably what we're seeing, you know, some of the financial data, and especially as we're getting ready to go into the budget cycle this next year. So probably the only other thing I was going to bring up on the operations report underneath the general managers and regular reports is we've really got a neat thing going on at the wastewater treatment plant. And Jeff Williams has been spearheading it, but we've been taking COVID samples and giving it to the Department of Natural Resources, and they've been studying it, and it's all in the report. But the one thing that's kind of neat about it is that it may be a leading indicator rather than a lagging indicator. So between Health and Senior Services and Department of Natural Resources and some of them, they're really doing a neat study. And so we're actually seeing some of the shedding of the virus impact the wastewater treatment plant prior to seeing a spike in more positive cases and stuff, and all that information's there in the operations report. But really want to recognize Jeff and what he's doing out there, because those guys have been diligent in giving the samples to the health department and monitoring it. And for the first time, we're actually starting to get some feedback. And Hannibal itself is tracking pretty closely to what they're seeing nationally. So when we see a spike at the wastewater treatment plant, we're kind of seeing some spikes in the positive cases in the community and stuff. So I just wanted to highlight that. Kind of, you know, it's fascinating to me. It's one of those things that you just don't deal with every day. So, but anyway, Jeff and those guys are doing a great job with it, and some really good information out there. So, and that kind of wraps up the general managers and operations report and financial report from staff. So, yeah, Bill.
Is there feedback directly to the hospital here in town, or does that go through the state and then kind of circular come back? In other words, what's the loop?
You know, I don't know
Because it's critical data. I think it's fascinating.
I don't know
too.
if the loop's been closed yet, because this is really the first time we've got any real feedback from them where they're starting to see some trends that they feel very comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so with the state agencies, I'm not for sure how that's getting fed back through the Department of Health's information as well. So
I guess
we actually had to ask for the information to try to find out, you know, was there some trends or something that we could learn from the study. So that was the preliminary result.
Well, I guess the reason I'm asking the question is that if we have that data and it's, you know, it's preliminary stuff. I get that. It's all new. But as it impacts the local hospital, if we have that data and say, hey, next week you can anticipate a little bit more or this is what we're finding, then they gear up for that. It's
Yeah.
just kind of the, how do you close that loop?
And I don't know if the test results are coming back that quickly where you can kind of see it. They're doing so much statistical sampling throughout the state, that the information goes and then the results come in, and then they're kind of comparing that to the trends that they're seeing at the wastewater plants, and then they're comparing it to what municipalities are seeing in their positive cases. So it's still probably lagging information, but determining that some of the things that you're seeing at the wastewater treatment plants may be a leading indicator. So
Yeah, we'll get better
good
at it, I'm
question.
sure.
Yeah.
It's the future.
It'd be interesting to find something to do with that, but that's like seeing the lightning before the thunder. What do you do?
yeah, but
Smarter people than me are working on that, I hope.
But, and tell you the truth, the one thing I want to follow up on, I appreciate everybody, and I want to recognize Matthew, the Teams thing and everything he's done through this whole pandemic. We've been able to have people work remotely and be very, very functional. We've been able to hold meetings and see each other and interact, and this wouldn't be possible without Matthew, and he really does. He deserves a lot of credit, and even at the next board meeting, I think you'll see improvements as we go forward. So, but just can't thank him enough and everything that he's done. So anyway, thank you, Matthew, because he worked really hard on getting this put together, and
I'm sure.
so anyway.
And I think it's the way of the future. I've had 2 different audits in my work, and it's been virtually, and I don't think you'll see those people travel again. I think it's probably here to stay for the most part.
Yeah. Well, there's benefits to it as well. There really is.
And
You're saving travel costs, you're saving time.
even our board meetings, these, there's a point where this becomes a little dicey. It's not travel costs, it's really the exposure stuff.
Right.
You can do it from home. I mean,
And we can, but the charter has to be amended, I guess.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, and James is here. We kind of talked before the meeting, but they amended the charter about 4 or 5 years ago where one could remote in, but that's kind of where it stands. So it would actually take some help with James, and I guess could you hear me, James, or not? But anyway, it's something that we'd have to look at to see.
If the Supreme Court can meet this remotely, I think we can probably create a scenario.
Yeah. Okay. That wraps up that section. Thank you, Bill.
Sure. So we'll move on to new business.
The one thing is before Paul comes in, I think Paul can still hear me. We had the audit. It's in draft format. We really wanted to get to the board as quickly as possible. City council meetings will be before the next board meeting. So we had this on there, and I'll flip it over to Paul to go ahead. But we just want to make sure you guys are comfortable with the audit, approve it, and then give council the assurance that we feel very good about the numbers and what the auditors have presented. So that was the main goal of today, and I really thought Amanda and Krista did a great job with that. So, Paul, I don't know if you had anything to add, but that's kind of back to you. So, if you can hear me.
Yeah, no, I echo that. It is a little bit unique in the fact that both city council meetings in December do fall before our next board meeting. And so just with the holidays coming up and everything going on, we figured getting their faces in front of you and presenting that live would be beneficial, even though it's not final. And as you heard them say, we don't anticipate there being any major changes. Obviously, there might be a few adjustments with that recycling fund and here and there. As far as the clean opinion goes, and that's the main thing, that's not going to change. And so we would, kind of ask your blessing or your approval on those numbers. And we do understand that if you need more time to look at them, that it's understandable. But by getting your approval now or here in the near future, that would allow us to go ahead and get those distributed out once that final report is available here soon.
And, just for, like I said, for the creditors, we have to get this distributed by January 1st. MISO actually gives us a little bit of a reprieve, but they like to see audited financial statements within about 120 days of fiscal year end. So we've already gotten those arrangements, but we are underneath a pretty tight timeline by the time we get to November, December, and the holidays. So anyway, that's out there. So that's before the board.
I think what Paul's looking for, guys, is for us to pass or approve the draft version of the audit. If you all are comfortable with that, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the audit as presented.
The only significant change that they had mentioned was moving the recycling fee. And I'm totally in favor of seconding that motion as long as there's nothing other than that particular change that has any substance. So, yeah, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do we need a roll call or anything on that? Okay.
And we'll make sure that if there's anything other than the recycling fee adjustments, it'll be before you, and then we'll hold off on it.
Okay.
So, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
So the next thing is this
Yeah.
sunshine law, public records policy.
You know, we held off 1 month to get this right, and I'm kind of glad we did. We've really got everything ready to roll on the website for people to make a records request. So we got the website in sync. We've got the policy in sync, so it's all ready to post tomorrow. The bigger thing is we worked with Angel and Lisa, making sure that our sunshine policies mirror the city, and we're coordinating those efforts. The other thing we're doing is posting a custodian of records in Courtney, and then Courtney will be interacting with Angel, who's the custodian of records really for the city and everybody else. So really want to recognize Courtney, and Matthew was another one that was a big help with this, but Courtney and Matthew did a great job getting this policy put together. Everything's ready to be uploaded to the website tomorrow. So the policy's before you, but we're in really good position on that. And so anyway, it was kind of something that was long overdue, and we're glad we got it put together. So.
Do you need anything from?
It is a board-approved policy, so it would take a motion and a second for us to.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yep, yes, it would.
A motion to approve the Sunshine Law Public Records Policy.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes.
And then the last item we have for board approval is the declaration of a utility truck, and Matt's going to come up and present it. And so go ahead, Matt. Thank you.
We periodically review the vehicles and equipment that we have to see if they're, serving their purpose, if they've reached the end of their life or whatnot. And one of the vehicles that we found that there's no longer being used is a 2000 3/4 ton Chevy truck with a utility bed. It originally started out as a maintenance electrician vehicle and had since been passed down and was at the wastewater plant. They're no longer using it, and instead of just letting it sit there and waste away, decided to go ahead and try to get it declared surplus property so we could go ahead and get it sold and get some value back out of it while we still can. So we offered it to other city departments. We had no takers on it, so I'm here just to ask for your approval to declare it as surplus.
Is it red or pink, or what's the deal?
Standard white. It's actually sitting out front here. So, and what we do is, if you all approve it being declared surplus, we'd put it on Purple Wave auctions. We've had good luck with them in the past couple of years, getting good value out of the vehicles that we have sold on there. So,
I move we declare it surplus.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that motion passes, Matt.
Thank you.
I believe that is everything on this agenda except for James. Do you have comments?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. No, I don't have any comment other than to say I've only been getting some of this. The sound's been cutting out. We may need to work on that, but I think I've got most of it.
Well, while you're still here, James, I thought of one thing after they got done with the CID proposal.
Yeah.
Any legalities there with us giving them the money?
Loaning.
Loaning them.
Sorry.
Are there any legal issues with us loaning that entity the money?
So long as it's a loan and not a gift, and so long as we actually have some type of formal documentation, I think we're fine. Paul, you don't have any thing where you disagree with that, do you?
No, I definitely agree. A loan would be a much better route, and then having that consideration on both sides.
Who would take care of the legal documentation in that respect? James?
I'm going to presume that would probably be me.
I was thinking so.
Basically, Paul would tell me what terms are appropriate therein, and I can draft a document. I mean, I just want to make sure he's comfortable with it, and we get it done.
Okay, sounds good. Well, if that's it, and we have no plans to go into closed session, I think we're ready to ask for a motion to adjourn. Hearing none, I guess we'll stay here.
That's called the pregnant pause. Motion to adjourn. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you.